Binding contracts and spiritual contracts. The enforcement ritual, occult families. Welcome back. I'm Adeline Atlas, 11 times published author, and this is the Occult Families, How to Spot Them series. Trigger warning. This video series covers disturbing and very serious topics. Full legal disclaimer in the video description below. In occult families, binding is not metaphor. It is enforcement. Binding is the ritual act that seals a spiritual contract, turning suggestion into structure, threat into architecture, and trauma into control. Without binding, contracts remain theoretical. With binding, they become operative. A binding is a spiritual mechanism designed to enforce compliance. It links the human will to an external authority, whether a person, a bloodline, an entity, or an entire ritual system. Binding always contains an element of force. It can be seductive or overt, symbolic or brutal. But the goal is the same: to make sure the contract is obeyed, even when it is no longer remembered. This is why people raised in occult families often feel haunted by rules they never agreed to, punished for breaking expectations they never consciously knew, or pulled into life events that seem eerily choreographed by something outside of them. That invisible hand is the result of binding. It doesn't just remind you of the contract, it executes it. Bindings are often layered into early childhood experiences. They may happen through religious ceremonies, family blessings, naming rituals, sexual abuse, initiations, humiliation rites, or even seemingly benign traditions. A child might be forced to repeat phrases they don't understand, stand in symbolic formations, wear specific garments, or receive physical markings. Each of these actions may serve as a binding seal, especially when timed with trauma, secrecy, or submission. The ritual need not be theatrical to be binding. It only needs two elements: consent, forced, coerced, or unconscious, and agreement, spoken, symbolic, or acted. In bloodline systems, binding is often layered with inversion. A birthday celebration might secretly serve as a contract renewal. A wedding might act as an alliance ceremony for two families bound by a cult lineage. A funeral might not just bury the dead, but redistribute their spiritual roles. Those who don't understand binding from the inside often miss the complexity. Binding is not just black magic. It is a long-term engineering system designed to control spiritual inheritance, personal willpower, and timeline access. What makes binding so dangerous is that it hijacks choice. A bound individual can believe they are making decisions freely, while actually acting out pre-coded instructions. They may feel afraid to leave a family, start a business, or speak out, without realizing that fear is being actively maintained through a binding tether. The contract doesn't just govern the external. It affects the internal: self-worth, sexuality, visibility, ambition, fertility, relationships, and intuition. Some bindings are embedded in phrases you were forced to speak as a child. Others are sealed through objects, such as jewelry, rings, rosaries, books, or heirlooms passed down ceremonially. Some are carried out through energetic branding, like touch, violence, or sexual access, that leaves a permanent impression on your field. Binding always leaves a mark. Whether psychological, spiritual, or physiological, the signature remains until dismantled. The deeper tragedy of ritual binding is that many survivors mistake it for personality. They say, "This is just how I am. I'm anxious, I sabotage, I freeze, I never finish what I start, I don't trust myself." But these are rarely personality traits. They are enforcement symptoms. They are signals that a contract is active, and a binding ritual succeeded. You'll know a binding is present when you hit invisible walls, when you try to move forward, but collapse instead, when you speak your truth and immediately feel unsafe, when every breakthrough is followed by inexplicable punishment, when healing causes fallout. These are enforcement symptoms, not random backlash. The contract has guards, and the binding is what activates them. In occult families, bindings are often refreshed cyclically. During anniversaries, births, deaths, eclipses, or holidays, family systems may check the field of each member. This is done through phone calls, photos, prayer rituals, shared meals, or even dream contact. These touchpoints are often disguised as care, but their function is energetic: to reinforce tethers, reactivate bindings, and ensure the contract is still intact. Until the binding is broken, the contract remains alive. Even if you leave, even if you speak out, even if you forget. The contract does not require memory, it requires energetic compliance. And binding is the mechanism that ensures that compliance continues, through fear, sabotage, and spiritual containment. This is why breaking contracts without addressing the binding often fails. The person speaks the right words, but experiences no change. Or they feel free for a moment, only to relapse into the same cycles. The enforcement wasn't removed. The contract was declared, but not neutralized. Binding must be named to be dismantled. It must be traced, acknowledged, and energetically severed, not bypassed, not outrun, not glossed over in love and light. The enforcement ritual must be reversed with precision and authority, so that the contract it upholds dissolves with it. What is a spiritual contract? A spiritual contract is an agreement, spoken, enacted, or imposed, that determines how energy flows between individuals, bloodlines, and realms. In occult families, Contracts are not abstract ideas. They are legal structures in the unseen world. They define what a person can and cannot do, what they owe, who owns them, and how much of their destiny is accessible or off limits. Most survivors of occult families do not remember signing a contract. That's because memory is not required. Contracts can be made without conscious participation. All that's needed is an event of spiritual significance, a bloodline oath, a moment of trauma, a name spoken in ritual, or a symbolic act of surrender. These moments form the core legal basis for spiritual contracts. They are treated as binding declarations in the eyes of the system. There are two key principles that govern spiritual contracts: consent, but not necessarily informed consent. The system does not need you to understand what's happening. It only needs to elicit compliance through fear, silence, or shock. A child who obeys out of terror has agreed in the language of spiritual law, unless that contract is later revoked with precision. Exchange. Something must be offered. That might be blood, sexual energy, silence, submission, fertility, lineage, talent, or time. The more valuable the offering, the more powerful the contract. While many contracts are installed without knowledge, some are disguised as protection, blessing, or family honor. A child might be told, "You're the one who holds this family together." That sentence, if spoken with ritual intent or emotional charge, becomes a binding clause. It transfers spiritual responsibility from the parent to the child, and the child's life becomes shaped around fulfilling an assignment that was never freely chosen. Spiritual contracts exist across three primary levels: bloodline contracts, inherited agreements that predate the individual; ritual contracts, agreements formed through ceremony, abuse, or symbolic action; trauma contracts, self-formed beliefs created in moments of collapse or betrayal. Each operates differently, but they share one function: they control access. A contract determines what a person can see, receive, say, build, or become. It also determines who has legal permission to interfere, whether family members, spiritual entities, or generational spirits. Most survivors of ritual systems encounter contract symptoms long before they understand what they are dealing with. These symptoms often appear as chronic cycles of sabotage that activate at key thresholds. Physical illness on specific calendar dates, sudden energetic depletion around family contact, psychic dreams with recurring characters or symbols, the inability to speak, leave, or succeed without backlash. These are not subconscious blocks. They are contract enforcement mechanisms. In healthy spiritual systems, contracts are sacred covenants, formed with consent, maintained in love, and dissolved when complete. But in occult bloodlines, contracts are weaponized. They become tools of bondage. They are designed not to empower, but to siphon, to replace divine sovereignty with engineered servitude. If you were raised inside a ritual family, you were likely under contract before you could speak. These contracts shape everything from your personality and perception to your fertility, relationships, and financial access. You don't need to remember the ritual. The system remembers you. What you can do is learn to see the architecture. When you understand that your life may have been built around a false contract, you stop blaming yourself for cycles you couldn't break. You begin to decode why willpower and healing were never enough. You realize that what felt like self-sabotage was often a legally enforced energetic tether, and that the contract still in place, ancestral, ritual, or trauma-based, is the mechanism enforcing it. In the sections ahead, we'll break down the four major types of spiritual contracts used in occult families. These include ancestral contracts, bloodline as collateral ritual abuse contracts, violation as access point naming contracts, identity as control anchor trauma-based contracts, collapse as insertion point. Each serves a distinct function, each alters the timeline, and each can be dismantled once you know what you're dealing with. Types of contracts: ancestral, ritual abuse, naming, trauma-based. Not all contracts function the same way. Some are inherited, others are imposed through ritual, some are installed through identity, and others are embedded during trauma collapse. Each type of contract uses a different access point, but they share one goal: long-term control. Below are the four most common types of spiritual contracts used in occult families. 1. Ancestral contracts, bloodline as collateral. Ancestral contracts are not made by you, but they still govern you. These contracts originate from someone in your lineage who made a spiritual exchange on behalf of their bloodline. A parent, grandparent, or ancestor may have entered a pact with an entity, coven, or spiritual system in exchange for power, protection, wealth, or status. When they offered their bloodline, the contract extended to every descendant. These contracts act like spiritual lines. The moment you are born into that bloodline, the system assumes you're collateral. You carry the debt of someone else's vow. And unless it is revoked, the debt remains active, accruing interference, attracting attachments, and binding your timeline to cycles you never chose. Many survivors feel this interference before they ever uncover the origin. They report being stalked by invisible forces, chronically blocked in love or money, or drawn toward destructive relationships with eerie familiarity. They may notice dreams of ancestral figures, unexplained illnesses, or sudden energetic crashes around family events. These are symptoms of an ancestral contract running in the background. What makes ancestral contracts especially dangerous is the assumption of spiritual inheritance. The system treats you not as an individual, but as a carrier of your bloodline's bond. Until the contract is identified, revoked, and legally replaced, the interference remains coded into your energetic field. 2. Ritual abuse contracts. Violation as access point. Ritual abuse is not just violence. It is a legal mechanism. The abuse itself is often structured to serve as the entry point for a spiritual contract. When a person, especially a child, is abused in ritual context, their dissociation, terror, and helplessness are not random side effects. They are the environment needed to install a contract. The spiritual system operates on law, not morality. It interprets silence as consent, collapse as surrender, and non-resistance as agreement. A frozen body, a dissociated mind, or a confused yes all count as legal openings for ritual binding. These contracts are rarely verbal. They are enacted through force, blood, symbols, or repetition. Often the victim has no memory of the ritual, but their life reflects the aftermath: recurring trauma cycles, spiritual paralysis, invisible monitoring, or the compulsion to return to the abuser. These contracts are often reinforced through cycles of reactivation, anniversaries, dream attacks, or specific triggers. If you've ever felt your body respond with terror or shut down around a certain person or date, even if your mind doesn't know why, you may be experiencing the reactivation of a ritual abuse contract. 3. Naming contracts. Identity as control anchor. In occult families, names are more than labels. They are leashes. Naming ceremonies may occur without the child's knowledge. In some systems, a secret name is spoken over a child during ritual, binding them to an entity, spirit, or timeline. That name becomes the legal anchor for the contract. These naming contracts allow the family or system to track, summon, or influence the person across time. They function like an ID tag in the spiritual realm. The child may not even know this name consciously, but it still governs parts of their identity, behavior, and memory. They may feel like they're being watched, even in silence, or that a hidden script is running their life. Naming contracts can also appear in more casual forms. Nicknames that carry energetic assignments, spoken vows like, "You belong to us," or phrases like, "You're our golden child." These words may seem affectionate or symbolic on the surface, but when charged with ritual intent, they act as binding clauses. They create a spiritual identity that is reinforced by family interaction, school dynamics, and even self-perception. If your identity feels assigned, rather than discovered, if you've spent your life trying to outrun a role you never agreed to, you may be under the influence of a naming contract. 4. Trauma-based contracts. Collapse as insertion point. Not all contracts require ritual. Some are formed at the height of human suffering. These are trauma-based contracts, agreements made in moments of collapse, betrayal, or death that are exploited by spiritual systems. When the psyche fractures, the field becomes vulnerable. Grief, humiliation, abandonment, or terror open a spiritual vacuum. If a belief is inserted during that moment, especially by a caregiver, abuser, or authority figure, it can solidify into a contract. For example, "You'll never survive without us. No one will believe you. You'll be punished if you leave. You are responsible for everyone's safety." These ideas, once internalized, become embedded in the energetic architecture. They shape your timeline, choices, and boundaries, not just psychologically, but spiritually. You may find yourself avoiding healing, rejecting help, or reenacting betrayal, not because you want to, but because the contract governs your sense of what's safe. Trauma-based contracts are often the most invisible. They operate beneath logic. They don't show up as belief systems, but as reflexes. The urge to apologize, the fear of being seen, the inability to feel safe in love or leadership. These are not personality flaws. They are contract symptoms. Together, these 4 types of contracts form the core spiritual architecture of bondage within occult families. They operate across time, body, and bloodline. And while each contract may appear different, they are united by one thing: the substitution of your will with someone else's agenda. In the next section, we'll explore the signs of active contracts and what it looks like when a person is still bound by an agreement they never consciously made. Signs of active spiritual contracts. Most people bound by spiritual contracts do not remember agreeing to them. That's what makes these agreements so effective. They're hidden in trauma, masked by love, or passed down as inheritance. But while the origin may be obscured, the symptoms are not. The effects of active spiritual contracts show up in your body, your relationships, your opportunities, and your internal resistance to freedom. Below are the most consistent signs that a spiritual contract is still active in your field, regardless of whether it was ancestral, ritual-based, identity-linked, or trauma-installed. 1. Freedom feels inaccessible, even after escape. You may have left the family system, cut ties with abusers, or physically moved across the world, yet the grip remains. The pullback effect is one of the clearest signals of an active contract. This often shows up as intense anxiety or shame when trying to speak the truth. Dreams that drag you back into family dynamics, financial sabotage or emotional collapse after reclaiming power. Sudden illness, fatigue, or misfortune around birthdays, holidays, or family deaths. You may feel like you're being punished for growing, because in spiritual law, if the contract is still valid, the system enforces it. 2. Chronic cycles of collapse. You make progress, then crash. You start to thrive, then lose everything. These collapses don't follow logic. They often happen right after a breakthrough, a big job offer, a major healing moment, or a step toward visibility. This is the contract's built-in protection mechanism. Its job is to preserve the terms. If you start breaking free, emotionally, relationally, or financially, the contract activates suppression protocols. These are energetic resets, not because you're broken, but because the contract is still binding. 3. Unexplainable energetic surveillance. You feel watched, not just by people, but by something. Even when no one is around, you can sense observation. There's a pressure, a tracking presence, or a subtle manipulation of your thoughts. This is often due to a naming contract or familiar spirit that still holds spiritual access to your field. Other common forms of contract-based surveillance include technology glitches when speaking truth, interference during prayer, ritual, or healing, specific people showing up at critical moments to derail your growth, repeating patterns of being found or punished for leaving. This is not paranoia. It's the consequence of spiritual permissions that remain unrevoked. 4. Repetition of the same abuse. With different faces. You cut ties with your abusive mother, and then date someone who treats you the same. You leave a cult, and then join a workplace that mimics the same hierarchy and control. If the contract is still in place, it becomes the template for all future interactions. Spiritual contracts do not merely influence what happens to you. They influence what you accept, what you're drawn to, what you normalize. Until they are revoked, they act like magnets, pulling similar energy into new disguises. 5. Feeling owned or indebted. Without logic. You can't explain it, but you feel like you owe them. Your abuser, your family, the system. Even after decades of harm, part of you still feels responsible for their well-being, or you feel like your success belongs to them, or you carry shame every time you try to grow. This sensation is not a personality flaw. It's the psychic residue of a contract. Contracts create internalized scripts such as, I must suffer to keep them safe. If I leave, they will die. I can't speak. I was warned. My life belongs to them. These are clauses, not thoughts. You didn't invent them. You absorbed them during contract formation. 6. Timed attacks, ritual dates, or family anniversaries. You feel fine most of the year, then spiral into darkness around your birthday, your abuser's death date, or spiritual holidays like Halloween, Easter, or solstices. You may experience sudden illness or exhaustion, vivid nightmares or attacks, uncontrollable emotional collapse, recurring memories you can't suppress. This is often the mark of a timed contract, one that was created on a specific date or ritual cycle and reactivates annually. These attacks are not psychological regression. They are spiritual triggers tied to a still binding contract that honors the original date of formation. 7. Dream activity that mimics agreement. You find yourself making deals in dreams, saying yes when you wake up screaming, interacting with family members in ritual clothes or strange locations. You may not fully remember the dream, but wake up feeling invaded, exhausted, or ashamed. Contracts are often maintained or resealed in dream time, especially if you were raised in a system that used ritual sleep manipulation, astral abuse, or dream programming. These experiences can carry the same weight as waking choices in the spiritual realm. Together, these symptoms form a pattern, the feeling of being spiritually owned, without evidence, explanation, or relief. That sensation is not irrational. It's the reality of operating under an unseen agreement. The most dangerous contracts are the subtle ones. The most devastating contracts are rarely the ones made in ceremony. They're the ones whispered in moments of collapse. They don't require altars, candles, or robes, just an emotional opening, a psychic fracture, and the right sentence spoken at the right time. In occult families, the most binding agreements often masquerade as emotions: guilt, loyalty, grief, obligation. You won't remember signing anything, but you'll feel it. In your body, in your reactions, and in your inability to walk away without shaking. These subtle contracts are enforced through repetition, not ritual. You're told the same phrase 1,000 times in childhood until it becomes doctrine. You owe us everything. Without us, you'd be nothing. We kept your secrets, now keep ours. You belong to this bloodline, always. These statements are not just verbal manipulation, they are spiritual assignments. Spoken repeatedly by someone with ritual access to you, they function as spells. Not because of the words themselves, but because of who said them, when they said them, and what your nervous system was doing when you received them. If you were dissociating, frozen, grieving, or craving love, your field was open. And in spiritual law, that counts as access. That means the sentence sticks. It doesn't matter that you never consciously agreed. The energetic system you were raised in was designed to install contracts without your awareness and ensure you enforce them yourself. This is why so many survivors carry a feeling of invisible debt, a pressure to keep secrets, a fear of betraying the very people who betrayed them. It isn't just programming, it's legal binding in the unseen realm. Some examples of subtle contracts include, I must succeed so their sacrifice wasn't wasted. I'll carry the pain so my siblings don't have to. I'll never tell what really happened, even to myself. They were evil, but they're still my blood. Each of these contains a clause, and every clause reroutes your energy back to the source. These contracts often go unchallenged because they feel like personality traits. You think you're just anxious, indecisive, loyal, or emotionally overwhelmed. But underneath those sensations is the truth. You're holding the weight of a contract you never chose. And the system depends on that confusion. It wants you too loyal to leave, too silenced to speak, too unsure to revoke what was never yours. The moment you begin to name these subtle scripts, the structure begins to crack. Because spiritual contracts, even the quiet ones, require secrecy and consent. Once you see them, name them, and deny them your agreement, their power begins to weaken. The truth about sovereignty. Sovereignty is not a vibe, it's a status. In spiritual terms, it means you are the sole authority over your field, unbound by foreign contracts, unentangled from inherited pacts, and inaccessible to unauthorized spirits, systems, or structures. Most people who claim sovereignty have never revoked a single contract. They speak of boundaries while still tethered. They believe healing means freedom. But healing without revocation only soothes the symptom. It does nothing to dismantle the system. You cannot feel sovereign while your name still sits on ancestral altars, or your childhood trauma is being harvested by a contract you never signed but still fulfill. In occult families, sovereignty is the first thing to go. It's stripped early, through naming ceremonies, trauma initiations, staged powerlessness, and role assignments. Once a child has been programmed to believe they are not their own, that they exist to serve, protect, or redeem the family, the system no longer needs chains. That child will self-police for the rest of their life. That's the efficiency of spiritual contracts. Once installed, they enforce themselves. True sovereignty requires a severance, not just from people, but from the structures behind them, from the networks of control that feed on confusion, guilt, and memory. Sovereignty means naming who holds keys to your energy and taking them back one by one. It means rejecting every sentence, symbol, or heirloom that ever told you your power wasn't yours. And it means understanding this. If you were born into a ritual family, your sovereignty was violated before you could speak. That doesn't mean it's lost. It means it must be reclaimed. Reclamation begins with truth. Brutal, unflinching, technical truth. Who benefits from your silence? Who thrives while you wither? What roles were you cast into before you even understood what they meant? Once you answer those questions, sovereignty stops being a concept and becomes a war. A precise, strategic war of disentanglement. One you are now equipped to win, because you're no longer asking permission to be free. Next, we enter the domain of enforcement. What happens when sovereignty is denied and something else takes hold? Spirits, entities, and attachments. It's time to decode who's really pulling the strings when a family member becomes someone you barely recognize. Hi, I'm Adeline Atlas, 11 times published author, and what you just watched is part of my signature program, the Chosen One series inside School of Soul. This series is not just a course, it's a blueprint for those who know they were different from the start. The black sheep, the scapegoat, the truth teller, the cycle breaker. Inside, you'll discover the family roles playbook, the golden child, the scapegoat, the enabler, the lost child, and how to finally step out of the part you were cast in without consent. How the black sheep becomes the goat, turning rejection into radical transformation and leadership. How to break generational curses and rewrite ancestral contracts so the pain stops with you. And how to recognize and escape modern forms of spiritual and technological targeting, from gang stalking to synthetic synchronicity. This isn't just about survival. It's about awakening. About reclaiming your voice, your lineage, and your destiny as one of the chosen ones. Click the link below to access the full series now, because the role ends the moment you decide it does, and the real script begins with you.